We're up here on top of Mount Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville Placid Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on Jay Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's -4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Rooster Comb. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. June 12th, 2021. The weekend weather was quite pristine, to say the least, here in the High Peaks region of the Adirondacks. Sunny, blue skies with a few puffy cumulus clouds above that were so still they looked like they were painted in the sky. Temperatures in the mid-60s with little to no wind. So as anyone who has spent any amount of time on the trail or in the woods could attest to, it was perfect hiking weather. I had hoped to get out in the woods on this day and plan to hike something small that requires no real thought or planning. You know, some mountains that I've hiked many times in the past around my house. But when I saw just how nice the weather was, and in a desire to push myself just a little bit to test out some nagging injuries and see how they're doing, I changed my mind, and I wanted to go on a more medium-sized hike. So I thought about heading to the Adirondack Lodge and hiking Wright or Phelps. But since it was already 10:15 a.m., I figured I might not get a parking spot. And then suddenly it hit me. As I stood in my front yard, pondering where I should hike, it began to call me, as I could see its summit sticking out above the trees from my driveway. A mountain that towers above my hometown of Lake Placid almost everywhere you go. The perfect medium-sized hike on a trail that I love, right in Lake Placid, and a summit I haven't been up since last year. Today was the day. It was time for my annual trip up Moose Mountain, the 47th tallest peak in the Adirondacks. However, in as spontaneous a fashion as my entire hike was to begin with today, my day's trek would actually take me up and over Moose, across the long connecting ridge over to McKenzie Mountain, in what would be a total split-second decision while I stood on the Moose summit. It's a hike that I've eyeballed for years, as the Moose-McKenzie skyline comes as a package deal almost everywhere around town. So today was the day, and it was time to hit the trail. Today's Moose-McKenzie Loop would be hiked via the Shore Owners Association Trail System, aka the SOA trails from Lake Placid, and would weigh in at just over 10 miles and around 2,500 feet of gain, including a long, wooded 3-mile walk along the ridge over 3,000 feet up through woods rarely traversed. A pair of mountains and a ridge seen all around Lake Placid, with views facing the high peaks and the Lake Placid Lake in all its glory. So I quickly loaded up my backpack, which involved taking out a whole lot of winter gear that I no longer needed in there. Micro spikes, gone. Backup micro spikes, bye-bye. Backup winter hat and gloves, gone. Goodbye. See you later. I do, however, keep a small beanie and a pair of gloves in my backpack year-round as more of a precautionary measure, since they basically weigh nothing, and if I did get caught out there overnight, it would be pretty good to have for warmth. But then I threw some basic food in my pack, a couple liters of water with some Noon tablets, and off I went. Then after a never-ending, long, tough, 7-minute drive in my van, I came to the trailhead and parked on the side of the road just past the Jackrabbit Trail. I grabbed my gear, suited up, shut the door, and started up the road to the trail. The day was underway. Moose Mountain has a very mysterious quality about the mountain, the SOA trails, and the woods that make up the 47th tallest peak here in the park. It's not well known or often traveled really, and it has an old-time feel back in those woods. And this is a mountain that mirrors the high peaks and can be seen all over the place, and the lake known as Lake Placid sits at the base of its eastern slope. It's a mountain that I enjoy very much, which is why I hike it at least once a year, and it's very easy for me to get to. So as I walked up the dirt road, while the lake sat in front of me, lake camps on the right, and maple syrup tubes lining the hardwood forest to my left, I came to the start of the trail in the woods, but I noticed something different, something that I've never seen before. Something clearly brand new and welcomed, if I do say so myself. New trail signs and trail markers letting people know, hey, this is the start of the trail to Moose Mountain, McKenzie, Loch Bonnie, and a couple others. Here on Blodgett Road, walking down the dirt road to the trail to head towards Moose. And here it is, turning left into the woods. And look at that. There are a number of seemingly brand new trail markers that say trail. That's pretty nice. That's definitely new. So that's pretty cool. Oh, look at it. There's more. Wow. This part of the trail will no longer be confusing to people trying to find the lake trail and the SOA trails. Very cool. I am really into the let's make it more accessible and easier to follow attitude that I'm seeing on this trail. There's a ton more trail markers too. Amazing. As opposed to shoo people away. Don't come. On towards Moose. Amazing. Now, years past, you'd have to know where to go to the lake trail and then ultimately the Two Brooks SOA trail. But these new signs help steer outdoor recreationists in the right path, literally, to get to the trails they're looking for. They're improving upon the access to the land. And in my mind, these new trail markers sum up the different mindsets between towns like Lake Placid and then towns like, let's just say Keene, New York. Actually improving the outdoor experience for everyone instead of trying to limit the outdoor experience for everyone. What a novel concept. But before I go off on a tangent, back to my hike. Into the woods I went, following these very brand new, well-dispersed trail markers leading me down the woods towards the lake, where you'll bang a quick left and eventually wind around and see some old signs that say Lake Trail, which will lead you around the shore, but still in the woods, towards the SOA trails. And then once coming to the SOA trails, it was time to go left. And these woods, as I mentioned, they just have an old feel about them. As the woods begin with mostly hardwoods, but as the elevation changes, the woods become a mix of new and old, with nothing in between as the forest floor is lined with gigantic old spruce, pine, and birch and other hardwoods, and then small 4 to 7 foot spruce trees below them. Nothing in between. Either giant old trees or small new trees. It's part of what creates the nice vibe for me over here on Moose. The sun was shining, the woods were alive with birds and squirrels. It was just a great choice of mountain to hike on a day like today, as the sun lit up the woods through the trees. And once coming to the trail split, I went left, away from Lake Placid, to begin my trek climbing. And having hiked this mountain many times, and even having done an episode on it previously, I knew this hike like the back of my hand. Just walking along the river right now, almost at the trail junction, where you can go left to go to McKenzie, or right to the Two Brooks Trail up Moose. I will be turning right today, up to Moose. Moose, one of my favorites. Yeah, we'll cross the river, which is usually pretty slick. So if you do cross this river, be mindful. It's very slick. Up, across the river, past all of the maple syrup tubes, and then up the climbing to the ridge. And the ridge is the best part of the hike, in my opinion. There's something very magical about that ridge, which I love, so can't wait to get there. So far today, already, I have walked into about a dozen spider webs. So something tells me that's going to be a trend today, unfortunately. Oh, and there's another one as we speak, right in the mouth, son of a... After walking through the trail along the brook, which runs from Bartlett Pond into Lake Placid, I quickly made it to the trail sign in the junction for Moose and McKenzie. Moose to the right, McKenzie to the left, marked by a wooden sign. Unknowing at that point that I would actually be coming back down the McKenzie Trail, I actually thought to myself, I've never hiked McKenzie from this trail. Maybe I should hit that instead today. But it's Moose, and I love Moose, so ultimately, I banged a right. Funny how things would turn out later in the day, but at this point, I had no intentions of doing the Moose-McKenzie loop. So at this point, I was 1.5 miles in, and the sign read 2.3 miles to Moose and 2 miles to McKenzie, with the lake trail 0.5 miles behind me. Continuing on to Moose, with another 1,775 feet of gain over the next 2.3 miles to the summit. Onward, I went over the always very slippery stream, onto the next section of trail, the muddy, open hardwood forest with lots of maple syrup tubes running all over the place. Now this goes without saying, and I'd assume no one listening to my podcast would do such things, but obviously when seeing maple syrup tubes in the woods, just leave them be, but you know that. So through the woods I went, following the SOA trail markers that are nicely scattered around as I crunched my way along all the old leaves from last year. So far at this point, my body felt just fine, as I mentioned. I'm still testing it out on recovering some nagging injuries, disc issues, and whatnot. Boring stuff. So that was a positive, though. It felt like a normal hike. So up I went, destroying spider webs across the trail with my trekking poles, but mostly my face. And as I went up in elevation, the woods started to change, and the higher I went, as often occurs in the ADK, the hardwoods became less and less, and the evergreens became more abundant. Now, while these trails aren't maintained anymore officially, though I do know of locals who maintain the SOA trails on a more volunteer basis, out of their love of the game and these mountains in particular, they're basically unmaintained, so some years the blowdown on these trails can be pretty intense. So today I noticed some spots that used to have blowdown there and then some new spots that never did, so it's always changing. So as I approached all these fresh stretches with new blowdown, I was met with the age-old question. Do I go over or do I go under? That is the question. And being 6 foot and 230 pounds plus the weight of my backpack, you may not be surprised to hear that crawling under blowdown is never my first choice. I am always a go above whenever possible. And then as you get on the log and then you sit down on it for a second and you get that, this is where I live now. I'm staying right here. You get that moment, love it. However, today, like most of the time, allowed for going over and the occasional no way around have to crawl under scenario. Or in some cases, depending how the blowdown was, having to go straight through. And about 3/4 of a mile past the McKenzie Junction, after climbing the section that I always dub in my head War Zone Alley, which is an area that has so much blowdown, looks like a war zone went through it. It was time for me to go through some of that blowdown that formed a tunnel. And while going through this tunnel, I took a nice slice on my left leg that measured 5 inches long. So that sucked. But that was actually only the beginning for today's journey. However, at this moment, Moose drew first blood today, and it drew it hard. But more would follow, too. How fitting that it happened here in Warzone Alley as well. I eventually made it up to my favorite part of the trail and the main reason that I really enjoy Moose, the section that I call Evergreen Alley. Now this ridge is high up in the sky and it feels like a gentle flat walk in the woods, but you're actually 3,000 feet up, winding and weaving through evergreens. And as I mentioned, it has a very unique feel and look, as giant old growth trees sit next to new growth evergreens. Evergreen Alley, however, also has a lot of fresh blowdown. And this portion of the trail, however, definitely disappears somewhat more and more each year. The trail is there, but due to the abundance of ferns along the side of the foot trail, growing bigger and bigger, the trail is kind of becoming hidden in plain view as each year goes. So those will be brushing against your legs a bit as you hike through this trail, but it's also quite beautiful at the same time. After winding and weaving and wrapping around the corners and climbing over and under many blowdown trees, I came to one particularly nasty section. 2 trees down at the same point, and one more tree down directly after those 2, forming the trifecta of blow.